Lenkiewicz, The Life, Volume 2, Chapter 9, Selections on Saint Antony. Saint Antony lived entirely alone on the alkali flats of the Egyptian Nitrian desert, denying himself both food and sleep for protracted periods. He experienced what would now be rounded up swiftly under the word hallucinations, a word sadly impoverished like the term brainwashing. It explains nothing. Researchers as diverse as Bataille in philosophy, Oliver Sacks in neurobiology, Terence McKenna in ethnobotany provide the strongest arguments that hallucinations are neither trivial fantasies nor mere pathology. When Robert retreated into his inner desert, as he called it, the visions which came to him, like those of Saint Antony, were both symbolic and real. The silence of solitude is soon populated. As Bataille says, since there is no real silence, silence will contain all sounds, all the words, all the languages, all knowledge, all memory. Inner experience is not easily available, and viewed from the outside by intelligence, it would even be necessary to see in it a sum of distinct operations, some intellectual, some aesthetic, yet others moral. But only from within, lived to the point of terror, that such experience appears to unify that which discursive thought must separate. Should anyone doubt this, it can be tested without drugs or fasting. Sit facing a brightly lit plain white wall and stare at it until the body's previously unnoticed inner workings make themselves known to you. Try to stop talking to yourself and just watch. Within a short time, the borders between the self and what is perceived out there become porous, as new colours, motes, and suggestions of forms become apparent. It's an easy process to start, but few people can endure it for more than a few minutes. Half an hour is a deep dive for beginners. The surrealist artist Juan Miro and André Masson, a close friend of Bataille, used this technique. Robert was prepared to induce similar deliriums in himself, so long as it did not involve the use of drugs, of course. He was terrified of them. During the spring and summer of 1990, he had Esther Dalloway read Masson's notes on this technique and sections of Flaubert's Saint Antony while he painted. Robert spent periods of self-enforced isolation in the studio, which from April 1990 onwards he refers to as his cave. It's worth dwelling on his descriptions of the delirial process at some length. If one were a hard materialist, one might think he's merely talking in a poetic manner about the arrival of a real lover or his imagination of one. Or, if one prefers a certain kind of metaphysics, one might think he was summoning something non-human. Quote, I sit in the studio cave and I wait. I wait for her to arrive. No specific arrangement made. A hovering in silent doubt. It's not will she, won't she, not a please don't fail, but a gentle knowing, a gnawing of anticipation. An impulse to seize her and kiss her long, but not hard, to feel her indifference like a demon. It's only these moments, and the moments of the act, that are of interest to demons. I stare at the stone wall in front of me. It becomes transparent and I see the hot desert sun and the visitor who may appear on the horizon. Am I in the act of waiting? Is the torpor, the acedia setting in? I get up and work on the listening self-portrait. I get up. Now. End quote. These reflections are accompanied by an almost childlike but highly suggestive watercolour. Two hot yellow expanses glow with solar simplicity. They're separated by a horizontal bar of lilac and pale blue. The colours are joyful. The upper region contains what may or may not be his visitor, a hovering white organic form resembling half of an octopus, or a ghostly boneless hand seemingly advancing across the lilac divide. The synesthesia and obsessional states Robert provoked in himself in the Murray notebook led to visionary experiences. In his identification with Saint Antony, Robert pushes himself even further. These experiences, whatever their ontological status, are generally less visceral, or else he's developed tactics for distancing himself from his gut reactions of fear and horror. but without the pangs of addiction and withdrawal, they now seem more fully formed, more disciplined, more patient. Quote, "Today I resolve the naked self-portrait, not a pretty sight. A white rag around the midriff, brush and palette in hand. The cave is cooler, the floor damp. Today I shall paint my cloven hoof. No visitors through the cleft in the wall for some time now. Anchorites spent their lives waiting, but certainly not for gods, devils, or visions. Like all of the human species, one waits for a visitor. Meaning is given to one's work in proportion to the degree one is distracted from it, and the fending off of the distraction. Night or day, no visitor. Silence, insects, demons." End quote. Waiting, listening and painting, hour after hour, day after day, until the process becomes something else, and the walls between his inner and outer worlds become thinner than the paint on the canvas or the ink on the page. He writes, "I sit in the cave, indifferently anticipating the demon. I see the desert through the wall adjacent to the 25-foot canvas, blank. She appears, sits with me. We debate theological variations, cultural presentations of the one God, Flaubert style. She says, 'I have this image in my head of a dark mound of earth, which I frantically dip into. Then I gladly climb down into the hole I've dug and cover myself with lots of damp, safe earth. Basically, I stay there.' She is preoccupied with the demons that pester her. She's not interested today. She leaves through the wall. A vapid, pointless temptation. No fire, no willfulness. This is no demon, but a corpse complaining that it's not been buried yet." End quote. The answer to the question, who or what are these recorded conversations with, will largely be decided by the reader's cultural bias. Robert himself was generally committed to a non-spooky but still scary physiological position. These visitors arise from the interior deserts and populated swamps of the body. God, the devil, the demons, and the real sitters are all entirely the fabrication of the painter and the saint. Quote, "If I were to construct another visitor, one which accepted lust but rejected the saint even more than the last one, would the saint be addicted then?" he asks in the notebook. The St. Antony listening self-portrait became the iconic image for the exhibition. Robert's inscription on a closely related drawing seemed to sum it all up. Quote, "The call, the question, or the voice of God, the speaker, unseen. Narcissus could not hear echo. In looking at himself, he did not know it was himself. The reflection was another. And so he died, blind and deaf." St. Anthony listens to the echoes all day, all night. The demons scratch and screech. A mindless sonar soliloquy, like life.